CEO's paralyzed daughter was left alone on her 22nd birthday, until a single dad asked, "Can we join you?" The wind outside whistled low through the narrow alleys of Willow Springs, a quiet little town where memories seemed to linger longer than people did. Inside Hattie's Corner Bakery, the air was warm with cinnamon and soft jazz. But at the far corner booth under faded string lights and lace curtains sat a young woman, Clara Monroe, just 22 today. Her brown hair was pulled into a neat ponytail. Her hands rested in her lap, folded carefully over the soft fabric of her pale blue dress. In front of her sat a modest vanilla cake, store-bought uncut, with a flickering candle she hadn't lit. She was alone, completely, again. You could almost miss her tucked there like a forgotten shadow, but there was a quiet dignity about her, like someone who had once dreamed big dreams and had to bury most of them. Clara had been paralyzed from the waist down since a car crash 4 years ago. Her life had since become a carefully decorated prison. Her father, Charles Monroe, was a powerful real estate magnate, wealthy, respected, and always busy. He hadn't shown up for a birthday since the accident. To the outside world, she had everything. A sprawling home, a team of caregivers the best technology money could buy. But what she didn't have was anyone who saw her. And then the bell over the bakery door jingled. A man in work boots and a faded flannel stepped inside, holding the door for a bouncing little girl in pink rain boots and pigtails. She clutched a small cardboard box tied with yarn. Clara barely glanced up, until she felt a pair of curious eyes watching her. The girl tugged on her father's hand and whispered loudly, "Daddy, she's all by herself." The man, Jake Whitman, 30 years old, a local carpenter, offered a hesitant smile. He had gentle eyes and the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but calmed a room by simply existing in it. "Hi there," he said, stepping closer. "We were wondering, would it be all right if we joined you? My daughter Mia, she noticed your cake." Clara blinked, startled. The world had moved around her for years, and suddenly someone had stopped. For her, Jake motioned toward Mia. The little girl stepped forward, box in hand. "This is for you," she said brightly. "It's a birthday cupcake. We made it for my mommy. But she's in heaven, so we bring one here every year." The words hit Clara like a wave. Not pity, not awkwardness. Just truth unfiltered and soft. Mia set the cupcake beside Clara's untouched cake, her fingers brushing the white frosting. "Now it's yours." Clara swallowed hard. The candle flickered on her cake, still waiting to be lit. And just like that, in the smallest, simplest way, something shifted. The table no longer looked so empty. The air felt different, warmer, fuller. Jake pulled out a chair. Mia climbed into the booth beside Clara like they had always belonged there. "Happy birthday," Jake said softly. And for the first time in 4 years, Clara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this birthday might be different. She didn't blow out the candle just yet. She wanted to make a wish. The little box Mia had brought was wrapped in blue-striped paper and tied with yarn. Nestled inside was a single chocolate cupcake, carefully frosted and crowned with a glittery star-shaped candle. Mia beamed with pride as Clara opened it, watching every move with the excitement of someone who had just given away a treasure. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cupcake from its box. "You made this?" she asked gently. Mia nodded. "With Daddy. This morning, we always make 2. One for Mommy and one to share." Jake's smile was soft-touched with a quiet ache. "We lost her 6 years ago," he said, meeting Clara's eyes. "Mia was just a newborn. It's kind of our tradition to come here on her birthday." Clara's throat tightened. "And you chose to share it with me." Well, Mia piped in before her dad could answer. "You looked really lonely, and nobody should be lonely on their birthday." Clara's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away before they fell. Lonely. That word felt like a label she wore every day. And yet this tiny stranger had seen her. Not her wheelchair, not her expensive coat, but her. And instead of backing away, she'd stepped forward. Jake placed 2 extra forks on the table and sat across from her. "You don't have to say yes," he said, voice kind but cautious. "We just thought, sometimes a cupcake tastes better with company." Clara laughed softly. The sound startled her. She hadn't heard herself laugh in so long, it almost felt foreign. "No," she said, "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." Mia leaned forward with sudden urgency. "Wait, You can't eat it yet. We have to sing. Jake chuckled. She takes birthday protocol very seriously. And so they sang, off-key, loud, with Mia's tiny hands clapping along and Jake harmonizing in a surprisingly warm baritone. Clara didn't sing. She just listened. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in years, she made a wish. It was simple. She wished she wouldn't have to sit alone again. When the song ended, Mia leaned in, elbows on the table. Did you wish for something? Clara smiled. Yes. Jake raised an eyebrow. Think it'll come true. Clara looked at them both, the little girl with frosting on her chin and the man who looked more comfortable in sawdust than the suits, and said, maybe it already is. Mia handed her a sparkler from her backpack just because, and Clara lit the candle on her own cake too. The soft glow danced across her face as she took the first bite of cupcake. Chocolate warm, sweet, and imperfectly perfect. Mia beamed. Jake raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. Clara exhaled slowly, letting the warmth sink in. It had been so long since she felt part of something unscripted, and as the afternoon light filtered in through the bakery windows painting golden streaks across the table, Clara forgot, just for a moment, about what she'd lost. She remembered what it was to be seen, not for her wheelchair, not for her name, but simply for being there. For the first time in 4 birthdays, she wasn't invisible. She was invited. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself returning to Hattie's Corner Bakery, more often than she ever thought she would. Sometimes she'd arrive early and just sit quietly watching the door, pretending she was reading. But her eyes always lifted the second the bell above the entrance jingled, hoping it would be them. And more often than not, it was. Jake and Mia became familiar figures at her table. What started as a chance meeting turned into a ritual. Wednesday afternoons, sometimes Saturdays, always unannounced, always welcome. Mia would chatter endlessly, about school, about the puppy she wanted, about the fairies she believed lived in the cracks of the sidewalk. Jake mostly listened, adding thoughtful nods and small stories of his own, like how the old rocking chair in their living room still creaked because he refused to fix it. Clara wasn't sure when it happened, but the silence in her life had started to feel less sharp, the edges dulled by the sound of Mia's giggles and Jake's steady voice. One crisp afternoon, as golden leaves scattered across the sidewalk outside, Clara finally asked what had been building inside her for weeks. "How did you do it?" she asked Jake as they sat by the window, steam rising from their mugs. "After she died." Jake looked out the window, his jaw tightening, before he answered. "You don't," he said quietly. "You don't get over losing someone. You just learn how to live with the space they leave behind." Clara nodded slowly. "I still remember the moment of the crash, the sound, the spinning. But what hurts more was waking up in that hospital bed and realizing my dad wasn't there. Not at first. He came later, with lawyers and charts, but never him." Jake said nothing, but the way he listened made Clara feel like she was finally heard. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She smiled bitterly. "He sent nurses, specialists, therapists, but never himself. I think I became one more thing to manage." Jake leaned forward slightly. "Well, we're not here to manage you, Clara." Mia, sitting at the next table coloring a dragon with a tiara, looked up at that moment. "We're your friends," she declared loudly. "Friends don't care if you have a chair. They care if you laugh at their jokes." Clara laughed out loud, startled and grateful. "I'll try harder to laugh next time." Mia grinned. "You better." As the day wore on, the conversations meandered from childhood memories to favorite books to bucket list dreams. Jake talked about how his late wife Leah had painted murals all over their old apartment, giant forests where animals talked and stars had names. Clara shared that she used to write poetry, but hadn't touched a pen in years. "I didn't think I had anything left to say," she whispered. Jake tilted his head. "I think you're saying it right now." Something in her chest cracked open. This wasn't therapy. It wasn't a transaction. It was life in its quietest, kindest form. Jake didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was real, whole, worth knowing. And as they left that day, Mia waving furiously, Jake holding the door open, Clara caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't look lonely anymore. She looked like someone beginning to remember who she was. 2 years. That's how long it took for something as fragile as hope to turn into something as steady as love. Clara had once measured her life by the rhythm of her father's text messages, cold clinical check-ins about her care schedule. But now she measured it by Mia's after-school updates, the smell of sawdust on Jake's shirt, and the way laughter began to linger in her home long after they left. Their time together wasn't flashy. There were no grand declarations, no whirlwind romance, just small, intentional moments that wove themselves into something real. One of Clara's favorite memories was the day Jake taught Mia to make birdhouses. She sat on the porch watching father and daughter smear paint across their hands and laugh like there was no such thing as brokenness. When Jake caught her staring, he grinned. "You're next," he said, holding up a brush. "I think it's time you built something too." She shook her head, smiling. "I already am." Mia often declared that Clara's wheelchair had invisible rocket boosters and would zoom around the living room pretending they were launching into space. Clara played along her laughter, echoing off the walls like music the house hadn't heard in years. In these ordinary days, love crept in quietly. Jake never made a big deal out of the chair. He opened doors before she could ask. He adjusted restaurant furniture so it would fit her wheels. He took her hand when they crossed the street, never out of pity, always out of presence. Clara in turn found ways to fold herself into their world. She began reading bedtime stories to Mia over the phone on nights she couldn't visit. On Jake's birthday, she surprised him with a leather-bound notebook filled with notes Mia had dictated about all the things she loved about him. One chilly December evening, they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets sipping cider. Mia had already fallen asleep inside, curled up on the couch with a stuffed sloth. Jake looked over at Clara, his eyes more vulnerable than she'd ever seen. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he murmured. She turned toward him, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Neither did I." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was settled. Like both of them knew what this was, what it could be. Jake reached out his fingers, brushing hers. "I don't know where this goes, Clara. I'm not great at planning things out anymore. But I want you in our lives, not just as Mia's friend or my dinner companion. You. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a plea. It was a truth. And the thing about truth, it had a way of making everything else quieter. "I want that too," she whispered. "All of it." That night, as Jake drove her home, Mia snored gently in the back seat. The car was quiet, but the silence felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Clara looked out at the moon through the window and smiled to herself. Love had found her, not in a fairy tale, but in a hardware store, flannel and a cupcake. And it was better than she had imagined. It had been just over 2 years since Clara first met Jake and Mia in the bakery. The laughter, the quiet dinners, the evenings of coloring books and spilled popcorn, it all felt so natural now, so earned. But joy, Clara knew, didn't come without a cost. That price arrived one evening in the form of a black SUV with tinted windows that pulled up in front of her apartment complex. Her father, Charles Monroe, stepped out tailored in his usual power suit, face drawn tight with disdain. He hadn't visited in person in almost a year, not since she stopped replying to his cryptic "hope you're well" texts. Clara knew the moment she saw him that this wasn't a courtesy call. He didn't greet her, didn't ask how she was. He simply strode inside, bypassing her living room entirely and heading straight for her office where he'd always felt more at home. The air in the room chilled as he scanned the walls. Photos of Clara with Jake and Mia at the park, a handmade birdhouse, a child's drawing, with the words "Our Family" scrawled beneath 3 stick figures. Charles's lips curled into something between a sneer and a warning. "I've been hearing things," he said without turning around, "about a carpenter." Clara's stomach tightened. "His name is Jake." Charles turned his eyes sharp. "He's beneath you." Clara's jaw clenched. "No, he's beside me." Her father scoffed, moving closer, his voice lowering into that quiet, dangerous tone she remembered from boardroom meetings as a child. "Do you honestly think this man isn't using you? He has a kid, no stable income. And you, Clara, you're vulnerable. You've always been delicate since the accident." The word landed like a slap. "I'm not delicate," she said, voice trembling with restrained fury. "I'm disabled. That doesn't make me broken. That doesn't make me easy to manipulate." Charles waved her off. "Don't be naive. You're still young. You don't know what people will do for money, for influence. I've seen it. No, Dad, Clara said, rising from her chair, despite the pain in her arms. You've been it. Silence. She looked him dead in the eye. You disappeared when I needed you most. You paid people to be near me. Jake didn't come with a paycheck. Neither did Mia. They came because they cared. His tone hardened. Then I'll make it simple. End it. Or I will. I'll file for conservatorship. I'll bury that man's business in lawsuits. I'll ensure he never gets within 10 feet of you again. The words crashed into Clara like cold steel. Her mind spun. Her father had the resources to do it, the legal muscle, the spite. And Jake had nothing but his heart. That night, Clara typed out a message with shaking fingers. I'm sorry. I can't see you anymore. Please don't try to reach me. She stared at it for 5 minutes. Then she hit send. The sound that escaped her afterward wasn't a sob. It was silence. A silence so heavy it cracked the air. Jake read the message while standing in his workshop. The air smelled of pine and varnish. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Mia found him hours later sitting in the dark. Daddy, why are you sad? He couldn't answer. And in the corner of the room, the little stick figure family drawing hung crookedly on the wall. Suddenly, everything felt just a little off kilter. Like something essential had gone missing. 3 days passed. Clara didn't leave her apartment. She barely ate. She didn't respond to the messages from her former physical therapist or the neighbor who usually brought her mail to the door. The lights stayed off. The air still. Outside, autumn had begun its slow retreat, and the trees lining her street wore their last bursts of red. On the 4th day, Jake finally moved. Not out of anger, but out of something deeper. A kind of quiet desperation. He couldn't let Mia believe that people could be discarded because they weren't wealthy, or that love came with a price tag. So, he packed Mia's favorite scarf, a soft blue one Clara had knitted with her own hands, and they drove. The Monroe estate was nestled at the top of a long, winding hill, hidden behind wrought iron gates and trimmed hedges. It looked more like a museum than a home. Cold, pristine, unwelcoming. Jake's pickup truck didn't belong there. The security guard emerged from the booth as soon as the vehicle pulled up. I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the approved list, he said stiffly. I just need a minute, Jake replied, hands tight on the steering wheel, to say goodbye, to help my daughter understand why someone she loves disappeared. I'm afraid I can't allow that. Mia's small voice piped up from the passenger seat. It's not fair. She opened the door before Jake could stop her and ran up to the gate, pressing her hands and face against the bars. Miss Clara, she shouted. Miss Clara! We miss you. Her voice rang through the otherwise silent air, piercing the trees, the marble steps, and somewhere inside a window. Inside the mansion, Clara sat in her dim bedroom, the curtains drawn. She heard it, the voice she had prayed to forget, because remembering hurt too much. She rolled toward the window, fingers trembling. She parted the curtains just an inch and saw them. Mia pressed against the iron gate, her scarf wrapped tight around her neck, tears on her cheeks. Jake standing still behind her shoulders, heavy eyes on the ground. Clara's chest collapsed inward. All her reasons, all her noble intentions crumbled like dried leaves. She couldn't protect them by erasing herself. She could only hurt them. She turned away from the window and grabbed her coat, wheeling herself with purpose through the hallways, away from her father's private study. Down the elevator, out the service door. Maria, the cook, who had known Clara since she was a child, looked up from her cutting board. One glance was all she needed. Go mi corazon, she whispered, reaching for the back door handle. Go find your smile. Rain had begun to fall, thin at first, then stronger. Clara didn't care. The streets blurred beneath her wheels. Her arms ached with the effort her clothes soaked within minutes. But her direction was clear. There was only one place she could go. Back to the beginning. Back to Hattie's Corner to Bakery. And somehow, even after all this time, Jake and Mia were there. Sitting at their usual table, a cupcake in the middle, untouched. Clara burst through the door, breath ragged, soaked to the bone. Mia gasped and ran to her, wrapping her arms around Clara's dripping frame. I knew you still loved us, she whispered fiercely. Jake rose slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. Clara! What are you doing here? She looked at him, voice steady despite the tears. I'm choosing, she said. I choose you. I choose Mia. I choose us. The rain kept falling outside, a steady rhythm, like the beating of a defiant heart. Clara sat at the edge of the bakery's entrance, her soaked coat clinging to her skin, raindrops running down her cheeks like silver threads. She wasn't sure which were from the sky and which were tears anymore. Jake knelt beside her wheelchair, placing his jacket gently over her trembling shoulders. His hands lingered not in hesitation, but in reverence. "You're freezing," he whispered. "You should be in bed. What are you doing here?" Clara looked into his eyes, those warm, steady eyes that never once looked down on her, and said with quiet resolve, "I'm done living in fear." She paused, her voice firmer now. "My father can threaten me. He can try to own everything I touch, but he doesn't own this. He doesn't own me, and he will not control who I love." Jake blinked, the shock giving way to something deeper belief. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. "I choose you, Jake Whitman. I choose Mia with her dragon drawings and impossible cupcake recipes. I choose all of it. All of you." The bakery had gone quiet except for the sound of distant thunder and the occasional hum of the coffee machine. A few customers sat frozen, pretending not to listen. But every eye was on them. Jake looked at Clara like he was seeing her for the very first time. Not just the woman he had fallen in love with, but a warrior. Then the bell above the bakery door exploded open with a violent clang. Standing there drenched and furious was Charles Monroe. His designer coat with soaked hair matted to his forehead, eyes sharp with rage. He stepped inside, scanning the room until he locked onto her. "Orti on assis." "Clara," he barked, "enough of this. You're coming home. Now." Mia instinctively stepped back, her tiny frame stiff with fear. Jake stood up, placing himself between Clara and Charles, but before he could speak, a blur of pink and courage moved forward. Mia, the 6-year-old, stood between Charles and Clara. Her arms crossed, her chin raised. "You're mean," she said loudly. "You're her daddy, but you're mean. My daddy says being family means showing up, not buying stuff. You make Miss Clara cry. That's not what daddies are supposed to do." The room fell into stunned silence. Charles looked down at the tiny girl, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand, little girl," he said with restrained anger. "I'm protecting my daughter." Mia shook her head, calm and certain. "No, you're protecting yourself. From being sad, from feeling things. My daddy feels sad about mommy, but he still stays." It wasn't an argument. It was truth, spoken from the only person brave enough to say it. Clara's heart felt like it had cracked wide open, not in pain, but in awe. She looked at her father, and for the first time, he looked back. Not at her chair, not at her silence, but at her. And for a moment, he didn't see a liability. He saw his daughter, a daughter choosing love, a daughter choosing herself. For a few long, trembling seconds, no one spoke. The thunder outside had quieted as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Charles Monroe stood at the center of the bakery, soaking wet, surrounded by strangers, outmaneuvered by a child. But it wasn't the embarrassment that shook him. It was the truth in Mia's voice that hit harder than any shareholder revolt ever had. He looked down at the little girl again, her small frame planted like a soldier between him and his daughter. He turned his eyes to Clara. She wasn't the passive, quiet figure he'd tried to manage for years. She was alive, her chin high, her lips pressed into a firm line. Her body still seated in that chair, but her posture straight, defiant, unafraid. "Clara," he said, softer now, not a command, a name. She exhaled slowly. "When I woke up in that hospital bed," she began, voice clear and unshaking, paralyzed, terrified. "Do you know what I needed?" He said nothing. "I didn't need the best specialists. I didn't need voice-controlled curtains or gold-plated wheel ramps. I needed you. I needed you to hold my hand and tell me we'd figure it out together." Charles blinked. "You didn't even look at me like a person, just another property to be managed, like I was your next failed investment." Her voice trembled not from weakness, but from the release of years of pain. "I'm not your project, Dad. I'm your daughter, and I'm in love with this man," she said, pointing toward Jake, "who sees me as whole, even though I'm not perfect." Jake swallowed hard but didn't move. Clara turned her attention fully to her father. "If you love me at all, see me now. Not the chair, not the liability, just me." Charles sat down heavily on one of the empty chairs, his body deflated as if the wind had been knocked from him. The bakery, the suits, the money. It meant nothing in this moment. "I didn't know how," he whispered. Clara stared. How to love me. He nodded. After your mother died, I kept building, kept working, kept expanding, because I thought if I just made the world big enough, rich enough, I wouldn't feel the hole she left. His voice cracked. But when you got hurt and I couldn't fix it, I didn't know what to do. Jake finally spoke. You're not useless, Mr. Monroe. You're afraid. Charles looked up at him, stunned. I know that feeling, Jake continued. When my wife died, I wanted to give up too. But Mia needed me. And I learned that being afraid and staying anyway, that's what makes you a father. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was healing. Clara wheeled herself forward and reached out a hand. Charles stared at it for a moment, then took it. Her hand was warm, firm, alive. One day at a time, she said softly, that's how I've learned to live, and I'll help you if you're ready. He nodded, a tear finally sliding down his cheek. I'm sorry, Clara. I turned away because I was afraid, but I see you now. From the side of the room, Mia tilted her head. So, does this mean we can be a real family now? She asked, hands on her hips. Because I've been waiting forever to ask if Miss Clara can be my mommy. Laughter erupted, gentle, surprised, beautiful. And just like that, something long broken began to knit itself back together. 1 year later, Hattie's Corner Bakery looked nothing like it did the day Clara sat alone in that back booth. The curtains had been replaced with new lace. Sunflowers filled mason jars on every table, and white ribbons wrapped around the doorframe like it was welcoming something sacred. It was Clara Monroe's 24th birthday. But more than that, it was her wedding day. The bakery had been her request, much to the surprise of her father, who had offered to rent out the state's most luxurious rooftop venue. No, Clara had told him gently, this is where everything started. This is where I found my life again. And so it was. The guest list was small but meaningful. Jake's carpenter friends who built the wedding arch from reclaimed wood. A few of Clara's old college friends now reconnected. And the entire staff of the bakery who had watched love unfold from behind the counter. Even Maria, her family's cook, arrived in a lavender shawl, beaming with pride. Jake stood at the altar in a tailored gray suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his hands nervously fidgeting with the cufflinks Clara had given him the night before. The aisle had been widened to accommodate Clara's wheelchair, which Mia had decorated with fresh white lilies and gold ribbons, insisting it looked like a royal carriage. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to cascade around her chair like soft waves. Her hair was pinned with delicate pearls, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of joy that can't be bought, only earned. She entered the room beside her father. Yes, Charles Monroe. He had changed. He'd stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company. He'd attended Clara's therapy sessions, asked her real questions, even cried once when she showed him a drawing Mia had made titled, My Grandpa Who Came Back. That day he walked slowly beside her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder as she rolled down the aisle. His eyes were red, but for once he didn't try to hide it. You look beautiful, sweetheart, he whispered. Clara reached up and squeezed his fingers. Mom would be proud of you too, Dad. As she reached the altar, Mia stood beside Jake, dressed in a sunshine yellow dress with a matching flower crown. She bounced in place, barely able to contain her excitement. The ceremony was simple and tender. The bakery owner herself officiated. Jake's vows were honest and quiet. Clara love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours, to make something whole. I promise to push your chair when you're tired, to carry you when needed, and to never stop seeing you. Clara's vows brought tears to every eye. Jake, you and Mia didn't just accept my limitations. You transformed them. You made them invisible. You gave me more than love. You gave me a family. I promise to be the mother Mia deserves, the wife you deserve, and to never let a day pass without choosing us all over again. When they kissed, Mia clapped so hard she dropped her bouquet, then immediately scooped it back up and declared it was the best wedding ever. The reception rolled on with bluegrass music, homemade lemonade, and bakery pies instead of cake. Clara spun in her wheelchair as Jake twirled Mia beside her. Even Charles surprised everyone when he made a speech about love and failure, and how sometimes redemption doesn't come from grand gestures, but from choosing to stay over and over again. It was a new beginning, but one rooted deeply in everything they'd survived. 9 months after the wedding, the little apartment above Jake's workshop was overflowing with soft baby blankets, picture books, and the scent of lavender-scented lotion. Clara cradled a small bundle in her arms. Samuel James Whitman, born just after midnight on a rainy Thursday. The birth had been complicated as the doctors had predicted. Clara's spinal injury made it a high-risk pregnancy, filled with doctor visits, tests, and long nights of worry. But she and Jake had faced every moment together, hand in hand, never blinking, never backing down. Jake had been in the room when Samuel came into the world, his calloused carpenter's hands trembling as he cut the cord. When they laid the baby on Clara's chest, she wept, loud, messy, grateful tears, not for what she had lost in her life, but for what she had built. And now, in their small living room, filled with sunlight and joy, their family felt complete. Charles Monroe sat awkwardly on the edge of the couch, his expensive suit jacket folded neatly on a chair. He held his grandson in his arms, something no one would have predicted 2 years ago. His hands, once used only to sign contracts and point in boardrooms, now gently cradled the tiny body of the newest member of the family. He looked at Clara with tears in his eyes. "I never got to hold you like this when you were born." Clara smiled, wiping her own tears away. "You're holding him now. That's what matters." Mia bounced onto the couch beside him and peered down at her baby brother with absolute wonder. "You're part of our family now," she whispered to Samuel. "A very special family." She looked up as if needing to explain. "We're not perfect, but we choose each other." Jake stepped behind Clara's wheelchair and gently placed his hands on her shoulders, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "We did good," he said softly. Clara looked around the room, at the man she loved, the daughter she never expected, the father she'd finally forgiven, and the tiny boy wrapped in her arms. And then she whispered the same words she had wished for 2 years earlier, but this time as a promise. "I'll never be alone again." Outside the window, the afternoon sun warmed the trees, and within the walls of that modest home, a new chapter had begun, filled with laughter, lullabies, bedtime stories, and all the tiny quiet things that make life whole. Sometimes the most life-changing moments begin with something as simple as a shared table or a cupcake. Clara Monroe thought her story had ended the day her body broke and her father turned to silence. But fate had other plans. Plans that came in the form of a 6-year-old girl with frosting on her chin and a man who carried both grief and hope in the same steady hands. This wasn't a fairy tale. There were no glass slippers, no grand ballrooms, just a modest bakery, a quiet carpenter, and the kind of love that grows slowly, through everyday kindness, difficult choices, and brave whispered truths. In choosing Jake and Mia, Clara chose more than a family. She chose herself. And in standing up to her father, she didn't just reclaim her independence, she helped him rediscover his heart. Their healing wasn't immediate. It came in fits and starts and missed steps and heartfelt apologies, but it came because they chose to show up again and again. That's what real love is. It's not flawless. It doesn't erase pain. It simply says, "I see you. I'm not leaving. We'll face this together." Clara's story reminds us that sometimes the families we build are stronger than the ones we're born into. That joy can rise from grief. That courage can live in the smallest acts, like singing off-key in a bakery or standing between someone and the weight of the world. And maybe, just maybe, it all begins with noticing the person sitting alone in the corner, because the smallest kindness can open the door to everything, to healing, to love, to home.